The dusty streets of Hachita, New Mexico Territory, had never seen a woman quite like Nora Graham when she stumbled off the westbound wagon train in the summer of 1878. Her face bruised purple, and her dress torn in ways that told a story nobody wanted to hear out loud. Wade Armstrong watched from the porch of his small ranch house on the edge of town, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He had ridden into Hachita proper that morning for supplies and witnessed the wagon master practically shoving the young woman off his train, her single carpet bag landing in the dirt beside her as if it carried disease. The other passengers had turned their faces away, and Wade noticed how some of the women pulled their children closer, as if whatever misfortune had befallen Nora might somehow be contagious. Wade was 30 years old that summer, and he had spent the last 8 of those years alone on his modest cattle ranch after his parents had succumbed to fever. He knew loneliness like he knew the land, intimately and without complaint. He had watched the town grow from a dusty outpost to a proper settlement with a general store, a saloon, a church, and all the judgment that came with respectable society. The townspeople tolerated him because he kept to himself and paid his debts, but they did not invite him to their socials or their Sunday suppers. He was outside their circle by choice, and he preferred it that way. But something about the sight of that young woman standing alone in the street, surrounded by whispers and pointing fingers, stirred something in his chest that he had thought long dormant. He set down his coffee cup and made his way into town on foot, his long stride covering the half-mile quickly despite the afternoon heat. By the time he reached the center of Hachita, a small crowd had gathered. The local women stood in a tight cluster outside the general store, their faces twisted in expressions of righteous disapproval. Wade caught fragments of their conversation as he approached. "Shameful, absolutely shameful," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her double chin quivering with indignation. "A woman traveling alone and in that condition. You can see what kind she is just by looking at her. The wagon master said she was traveling with a man who abandoned her 2 stops back," another woman added, her voice dropping to a scandalous whisper. "Said he was not her husband, if you take my meaning." "Well, she cannot stay here," Mrs. Henderson declared firmly. "We have standards in this town. We have children to think of." Wade looked past the cluster of gossiping women to where Nora Graham stood beside the water trough, attempting to wash the dust from her face and hands. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that fell in tangled waves past her shoulders. Her dress, despite its torn hem and stained bodice, had once been a respectable green calico. Her face, beneath the bruising, held a delicate beauty that would have turned heads in any town under different circumstances. She looked up as he approached, and Wade saw something in her gray eyes that caught him off guard. It was not shame or defeat, as he might have expected. It was defiance, burning bright and fierce despite her obvious exhaustion. She lifted her chin and met his gaze directly, as if daring him to add his judgment to the pile already heaped upon her. "Madam," Wade said, removing his hat, "I am Wade Armstrong. I have a ranch just outside town. If you need a place to stay while you figure out your next steps, I have a spare room." The murmuring from the cluster of women rose to an audible buzz of shock and disapproval. Nora stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language, her hands frozen in the act of wringing water from her handkerchief. "I do not need charity," she said finally, her voice hoarse but steady. "And I do not need saving." "Did not figure you did," Wade replied calmly. "But I could use help around the ranch. Cooking, mending, general housework. I can pay you fair wages and provide room and board. If you are looking for work, that is." Nora's eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face for the catch, for the hidden price that always came with such offers. Wade met her gaze without flinching, his weathered face open and honest. He was not a handsome man by conventional standards, with his sun-darkened skin and the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, courtesy of a longhorn that had objected to branding. But his blue eyes were kind, and there was something steady about him that seemed to anchor the chaotic moment. "Why?" Nora asked bluntly. "You do not know me. You do not know what I have done or where I have been." "Reckon that is your business," Wade said. "I am offering honest work for honest pay. What you choose to tell me or not tell me is entirely up to you." Mrs. Henderson had apparently heard enough. She marched over, her skirts swishing with righteous fury. "Mr. Armstrong, I hardly think it is appropriate for you to take in this woman. Think of what people will say. Think of your reputation." Wade turned to face her, and his expression hardened just slightly. "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, my reputation is my own concern. The lady needs work, and I am offering it. I fail to see how that is anyone's business but ours." "Well," Mrs. Henderson huffed, "I can see you are determined to make a spectacle of yourself, but do not expect the decent people of this town to associate with either of you. There are consequences for harboring women of ill repute." Wade felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Nora spoke up. "I am not a woman of ill repute," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the street. "I was engaged to be married. My fiancé convinced me to travel west with him, promising we would marry as soon as we reached California. 2 weeks into the journey, he decided he preferred gambling and whiskey to keeping his promises. When I objected to him spending our last money at cards, he struck me and abandoned me at a way station. The wagon master took pity on me and allowed me to continue with the train, but when we reached here, he said he could not risk the other passengers' comfort any longer with me aboard. That is my story, Mrs. Henderson. You can believe it or not as you choose, but I am not what you assume I am." The crowd had grown silent during Nora's speech, and Wade saw several faces shift from judgment to uncertainty. But Mrs. Henderson merely sniffed disdainfully. A likely story. A respectable woman would have returned to her family rather than continuing west with strangers. "I have no family to return to," Nora said quietly. "My parents died of cholera 3 years ago. My fiancé was all I had left, or so I thought." Wade picked up her carpetbag from the dirt and handed it to her. "The offer stands, Miss Graham. You are welcome to come with me, or you are welcome to find your own way. But I would appreciate your help if you are willing to give it." Nora looked from Wade to the hostile faces surrounding them, then back to Wade. Whatever she saw in his expression seemed to decide her. She took the carpetbag and nodded once, sharply. "Very well, Mr. Armstrong. I accept your offer of employment, but I want it understood that this is strictly a working arrangement. I will earn my keep through honest labor, nothing more." "Understood," Wade said simply. He gestured toward the edge of town where his horse was tethered. "My horse can carry both of us and your bag. The ranch is only half a mile out." They walked together through the parted crowd, Wade leading his bay mare and Nora walking beside him with her head held high. The whispers followed them like a swarm of bees, but neither of them looked back. Wade helped Nora mount, then swung up behind her, careful to keep a respectful distance as they rode out of town. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was weighted with unspoken questions. Wade could feel the tension in Nora's shoulders, the way she held herself rigid as if expecting another blow to fall. He kept his hands light on the reins and his eyes on the dusty road ahead. His ranch appeared over a low rise, a simple wood frame house with a covered porch, a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. It was not much to look at, but it was sturdy and well maintained. A few dozen head of cattle grazed in the pasture beyond, their rust-colored hides blending with the New Mexico landscape. "It is not fancy," Wade said as he helped Nora dismount, "but it is clean and the roof does not leak. The spare room is small, but it has a good bed and a window that catches the morning light." Nora looked around, and for the first time since he had seen her, some of the tension seemed to ease from her frame. "It is more than I expected," she admitted. "Thank you, Mr. Armstrong." "Wade," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, might as well dispense with the formalities." "Wade," she repeated, testing the name. "Then you should call me Nora." He led her inside, the house cool and dim after the harsh sunlight. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table and chairs in the center. Everything was neat but sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no reason for unnecessary decoration. "Your room is through here," Wade said, leading her down a short hallway. He pushed open a door to reveal a small bedroom with an iron frame bed covered in a simple quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a trunk for storage. True to his word, a window looked out over the eastern pasture, where the morning sun would stream in golden and warm. Nora set her carpetbag on the floor and ran her hand over the quilt, her fingers tracing the neat stitches. "Did you make this?" "My mother did," Wade said, "before she passed. I have been holding on to her things, not quite sure what to do with them. You are welcome to use whatever you find useful." Nora turned to look at him, her gray eyes softening slightly. "That is kind of you. I will take good care of it." Wade nodded and backed toward the door. "I will let you get settled. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I will be in the barn tending to the horses if you need anything. Take your time." He pulled the door closed behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. He had not planned on taking in a boarder, much less one who came with such obvious complications. But the thought of leaving her alone in that town, surrounded by judgment and condemnation, had been impossible to stomach. Wade had always had a particular distaste for mob mentality, for the way people could turn cruel when they felt backed by the righteousness of the group. He had seen it before in different forms, and it never sat well with him. His mother had taught him to judge people by their actions, not by their circumstances, and Nora's actions in the face of such hostility had shown him courage and dignity. He made his way to the barn, letting the familiar smells of hay and leather calm his thoughts. His mare, Bess, nickered softly as he entered, and he spent some time brushing her down and checking her hooves. The simple, repetitive work helped settle his mind. When he finally returned to the house an hour later, the smell of cooking food greeted him at the door. Wade paused, surprised, then made his way to the kitchen. Nora stood at the stove, stirring a pot that steamed with the rich aroma of stew. She had changed from her torn traveling dress into a simpler brown skirt and white blouse that she must have pulled from her carpetbag. Her hair was still damp from washing, braided neatly down her back. "I hope you do not mind," she said without turning around. "I found vegetables in your cellar and some salt pork. I thought I should start earning my keep." "I do not mind at all," Wade said honestly. He could not remember the last time someone had cooked for him. "Smells wonderful." Nora did turn then, and he saw that she had cleaned the worst of the bruising from her face, though the purple marks still stood out starkly against her pale skin. "I am a good cook," she said matter-of-factly. "My mother taught me well. I can sew and mend, keep house, tend a garden. I will not be a burden to you, Wade. That is a promise." "Never thought you would be," Wade replied. He moved to the basin to wash his hands, suddenly aware of how trail-dusty and work-worn he must look. "But you do not have to prove yourself to me right off. You have had a hard journey. It is all right to rest a bit." "I do not want to rest," Nora said, her voice tight. "If I rest, I will think, and if I think, I will remember, and I would rather not do that just yet." Wade understood that sentiment all too well. He had spent years after his parents' deaths working himself to exhaustion each day just to avoid the quiet moments when grief could catch up with him. He nodded and went to set the table, pulling out plates and utensils without being asked. They ate dinner together as the sun set beyond the window, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The silence between them was easier now, more companionable. Nora had not exaggerated her cooking skills. The stew was rich and flavorful, better than anything Wade had managed to cobble together for himself in months. "This is really good," he said after several bites. "Thank you." Nora's lips curved in a small smile, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges that pain and betrayal had carved there. "You are welcome. It feels good to cook for someone who appreciates it." They talked a little as they ate, careful conversation that skirted around the difficult topics. Wade told her about the ranch, about his daily routine and what needed doing. Nora listened attentively, asking practical questions about the livestock and the land. He found himself appreciating her directness, the way she did not simper or play coy. She approached the work arrangement exactly as he had intended it, as a business matter between equals. After dinner, Nora insisted on cleaning up while Wade went to check on the livestock one final time before full darkness fell. The evening air was cooling rapidly, as it always did in the high desert, and the stars were beginning to emerge in their thousands overhead. Wade stood in the yard for a long moment, looking up at that vast sky and wondering what the coming days would bring. The next morning, Wade woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He dressed quickly and emerged from his room to find Nora already up and working, the kitchen filled with early morning light and the sounds of domesticity that had been absent from his life for so long. She had found his mother's apron and wore it tied neatly around her waist, her hair again braided back in a practical style. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I hope I did not wake you. I am used to rising early." "Not at all," Wade said, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "I am usually up before dawn anyway. You beat me to it today." They ate breakfast together, and then Wade explained the day's work. He needed to ride out to check the cattle in the far pasture and repair a section of fence that had come down. Nora said she would clean the house thoroughly and see what needed doing in the garden plot behind the house. "I noticed you have chickens," she said, "but no eggs in the house." Wade looked sheepish. "I've been meaning to build them a proper coop. Right now they are just roosting in the barn and the coyotes have been getting more than their share." "Then that will be my first project," Nora declared. "Point me to your tools and spare lumber, and I will see what I can do." Wade raised his eyebrows. "You know how to build a chicken coop?" "My father was a carpenter," Nora said. "I spent my childhood handing him nails and learning how things fit together. I may not be as skilled as he was, but I can manage simple construction." Wade found himself smiling despite himself. "All right then. The tools are in the shed behind the barn. Help yourself to whatever you need." They parted ways after breakfast, Wade heading out to the far pasture with Bess and his tools, Nora rolling up her sleeves to tackle her chosen project. Wade found himself thinking about her as he worked, wondering at the mystery she represented. She was clearly educated, clearly from a decent family, yet circumstances had brought her low. The bruises on her face spoke of violence, and the betrayal she had experienced would have broken many people. But there was a core of strength in Nora Graham that Wade found himself admiring more with each passing hour. The fence repair took most of the morning, and by the time Wade returned to the ranch house, the sun was high and hot overhead. He was surprised to see that Nora had made significant progress on the chicken coop. She had framed out a basic structure against the side of the barn, using salvaged lumber and doing neat, efficient work. She was currently hammering in crossbeams, her face flushed with heat and effort. Wade dismounted and walked over, impressed despite himself. "You are not exaggerating your skills." Nora looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "My father always said that honest work was its own reward. I find that building something helps clear the mind." "Can I give you a hand?" Wade offered. "Two people can finish this faster than one." They worked together through the afternoon, Wade following Nora's directions as she explained her design. She wanted to create a secure, raised coop that would keep the chickens safe from predators while still allowing them to move freely during the day. Wade found himself enjoying the collaboration, the easy way they fell into a working rhythm. Nora was not afraid to get her hands dirty or to tackle heavy work, but she also knew when to ask for help with something beyond her physical strength. By late afternoon, they had completed a sturdy chicken coop with nesting boxes, a secure door, and even a small ramp for the chickens to access their new home. Nora stood back, hands on her hips, surveying their work with evident satisfaction. "That will do nicely," she said. "Now we just need to convince the chickens to use it." Wade chuckled. "That might be the hardest part. Chickens are stubborn creatures." They spent the next hour rounding up the scattered chickens and introducing them to their new home. It was comical work, with the birds squawking and flapping and generally objecting to the change in their routine. But eventually, with patience and a scattering of corn, they managed to get all dozen birds settled into the coop. "There," Nora said, closing the coop door with a sense of triumph. "Tomorrow morning we will have fresh eggs." "I will believe that when I see it," Wade said, but he was smiling. He could not remember the last time he had laughed while doing chores. "Thank you for this. It has been on my list for months, but I never seemed to get around to it." "It is what you are paying me for," Nora replied, but there was warmth in her voice. "Besides, I told you I would earn my keep." That evening they fell into the same comfortable routine as the night before. Nora cooked dinner while Wade tended to the last of the day's chores, and then they ate together as darkness fell outside. The conversation was easier now, flowing more naturally. Wade told her stories about the ranch, about learning to work cattle from his father, about the challenges of making a living from the harsh New Mexico land. Nora listened and asked questions, and occasionally she shared small details about her own life before, careful pieces of information that helped Wade understand her better without dwelling on the painful recent past. The days began to blend together in a pleasant rhythm. Wade would wake each morning to find Nora already up and working. They would share breakfast, plan the day's tasks, and then go about their separate work with the ease of people who understood and respected each other's capabilities. Nora threw herself into improving the ranch with an energy that Wade found both impressive and slightly worrying. She seemed determined to prove her worth at every turn, working from dawn until well after dark. True to her prediction, the chicken coop yielded fresh eggs each morning, and Nora began experimenting with expanded meals, making the kinds of foods Wade had not tasted since his mother passed. Fresh bread appeared on the table, along with pies made from preserved fruit and cookies that melted in the mouth. The house took on a different character under Nora's care, cleaner and more welcoming without losing its essential simplicity. But the town of Hachita had not forgotten about them. The first time Wade rode into town for supplies, about a week after Nora had come to the ranch, he felt the weight of judgment settle over him like a heavy coat. People who had always greeted him with a nod now turned away. Mrs. Henderson made a point of crossing the street to avoid him. Even the shopkeeper, Mr. Wilson, who had always been friendly, seemed cool and distant as he rang up Wade's purchases. "Heard you took in that woman," Mr. Wilson said, not quite meeting Wade's eyes. "That is your business, of course, but you should know people are talking." "Let them talk," Wade said evenly, counting out coins for his supplies. "Nora is working for me as a housekeeper. There is nothing improper about the arrangement." "Maybe not," Mr. Wilson said, "but you know how people are. They see what they want to see, and right now they want to see scandal." Wade gathered his packages and left without further comment, but the encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew small-town gossip could be vicious, but he had hoped that people would come to see reason once they realized that Nora was simply working an honest job. Apparently, he had been optimistic. When he returned to the ranch, Nora took one look at his face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Wade set down the supplies and sighed. "Nothing, really. Just town gossip. People are talking about us." Nora's expression tightened. "I am sorry. I am causing problems for you." "You are not causing anything," Wade said firmly. "People are choosing to make assumptions and judgments. That is on them, not on you." "But it is affecting you," Nora persisted. "Your reputation in town matters. You have to do business there." "I do not want to be the reason you become an outcast in your own community." Wade moved closer, his blue eyes serious. "Nora, listen to me. I chose to offer you work. I chose to bring you here. If the town wants to judge me for that, then they are not people whose opinions I value in the first place. You have done nothing wrong, and neither have I. We are going to hold our heads up and keep living our lives, and eventually, people will find something else to gossip about." Nora searched his face, her gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are a good man, Wade Armstrong, better than I thought existed." "I am just a man," Wade said quietly, "trying to do what seems right." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Nora turned away, busying herself with unpacking the supplies, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. Wade found himself noticing small things about Nora that he had not allowed himself to see before. The way the evening light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. The sound of her laugh when one of the chickens did something particularly foolish. The competent grace with which she moved through the house and around the ranch. She was beautiful, he realized, not just in appearance but in spirit. There was a resilience to her, a refusal to be broken by what she had endured that called to something deep in his own soul. For her part, Nora found herself watching Wade when he was not looking. She noticed the kindness in his hands when he worked with the animals, the patience he showed when teaching her about cattle management, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. He was nothing like her former fiancé, who had been smooth, talking, and charming but ultimately hollow. Wade was solid, dependable, a man whose word meant something. She felt safer with him than she had felt in longer than she could remember. But both of them were careful not to acknowledge what was growing between them. The arrangement was professional, they reminded themselves. Nora was an employee, Wade was her employer. Anything beyond that would be inappropriate, would confirm everything the town was already whispering about them. Summer deepened into its full heat, and the work continued. Wade taught Nora to ride, starting her on his gentlest mare and patiently coaching her through the basics. She proved to be a quick learner, fearless in a way that both impressed and worried him. Soon, she was riding out with him to check the cattle, learning to spot signs of illness or injury, understanding the rhythms of ranch life in a way that went beyond simple housekeeping. One evening in late August, they were riding back from the far pasture when they spotted smoke rising from a neighboring ranch. Wade immediately turned Bess in that direction, kicking her into a gallop. Nora followed without hesitation, urging her mare to keep pace. They arrived to find the neighbor's barn engulfed in flames. The family was already outside, having managed to get most of their livestock out, but they were struggling to contain the fire before it spread to the house. Wade and Nora dismounted and immediately joined the bucket brigade, passing water from the well in a desperate attempt to keep the flames from spreading. They worked for hours, covered in soot and ash, their muscles screaming with exhaustion. But slowly, with the combined effort of everyone present, they managed to contain the fire. The barn was lost, but the house and the family were safe. As the last of the flames were doused, the neighbor, a weathered rancher named Tom Peters, approached Wade and Nora. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "If you two had not shown up when you did, we might have lost everything." Wade nodded, catching his breath. "Glad we could help. Neighbors help neighbors. That is how it works out here." Tom Peters looked at Nora, seeming to really see her for the first time. "You worked as hard as any man tonight, miss. I appreciate that." Nora met his gaze steadily, her face streaked with soot. "I am glad I could help." They rode home in the darkness, both too exhausted to talk much. But when they reached the ranch, as Wade was helping Nora down from her horse, she suddenly threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for treating me like I have value, for not making me feel less than what I am." Wade's arms came up instinctively, holding her close. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin. For a long moment they stood there in the darkness, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes, holding each other with an intensity that spoke of needs neither had voiced. Then Nora pulled back, looking up at him. Her gray eyes were luminous in the starlight, her face vulnerable in a way he had never seen before. "Wade, I think I should tell you something." "All right," he said softly, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "When I first came here, I was so angry," Nora said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Angry at the man who betrayed me, angry at the world, angry at myself for being so foolish. I thought I would never trust anyone again. But you have been nothing but good to me. You have given me a place to stay, work that makes me feel useful, respect that I thought I had lost forever. And I have been fighting this feeling for weeks now, but tonight, when we were fighting that fire together, I realized something." "What did you realize?" Wade asked, his heart hammering in his chest. "That I am falling in love with you," Nora said simply. "And I do not know what to do about it." Wade felt like the breath had been knocked out of him. He stared at her, his mind racing. Everything in him wanted to pull her close and kiss her, to tell her that he had been falling in love with her too, slowly and surely, from the moment she had lifted her chin in defiance against the judgment of the town. But there was also caution, born from years of solitude and the knowledge that feelings could be complicated. "Nora," he said carefully, "you have been through a terrible betrayal. It is natural to feel grateful to someone who treats you kindly after that. But gratitude is not the same thing as love. I do not want you to confuse the two." Nora shook her head firmly. "I know the difference, Wade. I thought I loved Robert, but what I felt for him was nothing like this. He made me feel small, like I needed his approval to matter. You make me feel strong. You make me feel like I can be myself without apology. That is not gratitude. That is love." Wade's resolve crumbled. He cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands, careful of the fading bruises that still marked her skin. "I am falling in love with you too," he admitted. "Have been for weeks now. But I wanted to give you time, wanted to make sure you were choosing me because you truly wanted to, not because you felt obligated or grateful." "I am choosing you," Nora said firmly. "If you will have me." Wade answered by kissing her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as she responded with equal fervor. It was a kiss that spoke of loneliness ending, of two wounded souls finding unexpected solace in each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I will have you," he whispered. "If you will have me. Not as my employee, but as my partner, as my wife, if you will say yes." Nora laughed, a sound of pure joy that rang out in the darkness. "Are you proposing to me when we are both covered in soot and smell like smoke?" "I suppose I am," Wade said, smiling. "Not very romantic, is it?" "It is perfect," Nora said, kissing him again. "And yes, yes, I will marry you, Wade Armstrong. Nothing would make me happier." They stood there in the yard, holding each other and making promises in the darkness, until the practical concerns of their smoke-damaged clothes and exhausted bodies finally drove them inside. They parted at the hallway, each going to their separate rooms, but the knowledge that this separation was temporary made it bearable. The next morning, Wade rode into Hachita with purpose. He went straight to the church and spoke to Reverend Matthews about arranging a wedding. The Reverend, a kindly man in his 50s, listened without interruption. "Are you certain about this, Wade?" he asked gently. "The town has been quite vocal about this young woman. Marriage to her will not be easy." "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life," Wade replied. "Nora is a good woman who was dealt a bad hand. She deserves happiness, and if I can provide that, then I will count myself the luckiest man alive. The town can think what it likes." Reverend Matthews studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. When would you like to hold the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Wade said. "This week, if you can manage it." "That quick?" The Reverend raised his eyebrows. "That will certainly give the gossips something to talk about." "They are already talking," Wade said dryly. "Might as well give them the truth to discuss." Word of the impending wedding spread through Hachita like wildfire. The reactions were mixed. Some people were scandalized, seeing it as confirmation of their worst suspicions about the impropriety of Wade and Nora's living arrangement. Others, like Tom Peters and his family, were supportive, having seen Nora's character firsthand during the barn fire. A few of the older women, who remembered Wade's parents and knew him to be a good man, chose to give Nora the benefit of the doubt. Mrs. Henderson, predictably, led the opposition. She made her opinions known loudly and frequently, declaring that no respectable person would attend such a wedding. She even attempted to convince Reverend Matthews to refuse to perform the ceremony, but the Reverend stood firm. Whatever his private reservations, he believed in redemption and second chances, and he would not deny Wade and Nora the blessing of a proper marriage. On the morning of the wedding, 5 days after Wade's proposal, Nora stood in her small room staring at her reflection in the washstand mirror. She wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself from fabric Wade had purchased for her. It was not fancy, but it was clean and new, and the color brought out the gray of her eyes. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, brushed until it shone with auburn highlights. There was a soft knock at the door, and Wade's voice came through. "Nora, are you ready?" She opened the door to find him standing there in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked at her with such open adoration that it made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said softly. "So do you," Nora replied, taking his offered arm. They rode into town together in Wade's wagon, the late summer sun warm on their faces. Neither spoke much, but their hands were clasped tightly together, drawing strength from each other for whatever reception awaited them. The church was not packed, but neither was it empty. Tom Peters and his family were there, along with several other ranchers from the surrounding area. Mr. Wilson from the general store had come, along with his wife. A scattering of other townspeople filled the pews, some out of genuine goodwill, others likely out of curiosity. Notably absent were Mrs. Henderson and her closest circle of friends, but Wade and Nora had expected that. Reverend Matthews performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Wade's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Nora for all the days of his life. Nora's voice shook slightly with emotion as she made her own promises, but her gaze never wavered from Wade's face. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and invited Wade to kiss his bride, Wade cupped Nora's face gently and kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation found themselves wiping away tears. The reception was held in the churchyard, a simple affair with cakes and lemonade provided by those who had attended. It was not lavish, but it was warm and genuine. People approached the newlyweds to offer congratulations, and Nora found herself moved by the kindness of those who had chosen to look past the gossip and see her for who she truly was. Tom Peters shook Wade's hand heartily. "You have got yourself a fine woman, Wade. Anyone who worked as hard as she did to help save our property is all right in my book." His wife, Martha, hugged Nora warmly. "You are welcome to visit us anytime, dear. Do not let the small-minded people of this town make you feel unwelcome. There are good people here who will stand by you." As the sun began to set, Wade and Nora climbed back into the wagon and headed home. Home. The word had new meaning now, Nora thought. It was not just a place where she worked and slept. It was where she belonged with the man she loved. That night, as husband and wife, they came together with a passion and tenderness that erased the last shadows of Nora's painful past. Wade was gentle and patient, making sure Nora felt cherished and safe. And Nora gave herself fully, holding nothing back, finally free to express all the love that had been building in her heart for weeks. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Wade's bed, their bed now, talking quietly in the darkness. Wade traced gentle patterns on Nora's bare shoulder, marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short weeks. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Nora murmured, her head resting on his chest. "After Robert, I thought I had lost the capacity to trust, to love. But you brought it back to life." "You did the same for me," Wade said, kissing the top of her head. "I had gotten used to being alone, convinced myself I preferred it that way, but I was just afraid of being hurt, of losing someone else I cared about. You made me want to take that risk again." "What do you think the future holds for us?" Nora asked, her fingers tracing the muscles of his chest. "Whatever we make of it," Wade replied. "I hope for children someday if we are blessed. I hope to build this ranch into something substantial, something we can be proud of. But mostly, I just hope to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night the same way. That would be enough." "More than enough," Nora agreed, kissing him softly. The months that followed were the happiest of either of their lives. Fall came to New Mexico territory with cooler temperatures and vivid sunsets. Nora threw herself into improving the ranch with even greater energy now that it was truly her home. She planted a large vegetable garden that would provide food through the winter. She learned to help with the cattle, becoming a skilled rider and an able assistant during branding and roundup. She befriended the neighboring ranch wives, particularly Martha Peters, who became a close friend and confidante. Slowly, grudgingly, even the most stubborn citizens of Hachita began to soften their stance. It was hard to maintain moral outrage in the face of a marriage that was so obviously based on genuine love and mutual respect. When Nora would come to town with Wade, she held her head high and greeted everyone politely, never showing hurt or anger at those who had judged her. Her quiet dignity and obvious devotion to Wade gradually won over even some of her harshest critics. The turning point came in late October, when a sudden early snowstorm caught several families unprepared. Wade and Nora worked tirelessly, riding out in dangerous conditions to check on their neighbors and make sure everyone had enough supplies to weather the storm. Nora personally delivered food and medicine to families in need, never once mentioning the cold reception she had received from many of them just months earlier. Mrs. Henderson's own daughter fell ill during that storm, and it was Nora who rode through the snow to bring the doctor and then stayed to nurse the girl through a dangerous fever. For 3 days, Nora barely slept, sitting at the bedside and applying cool compresses, spooning broth into the girl's mouth, keeping vigilant watch. When the fever finally broke and the girl began to recover, Mrs. Henderson broke down in tears of gratitude. "I was so wrong about you," she sobbed, clutching Nora's hands. "I judged you without knowing you, without giving you a chance. You are a far better Christian than I have been. Can you ever forgive me?" Nora squeezed her hands gently. "There is nothing to forgive, Mrs. Henderson. You were trying to protect your community as you saw fit. I understand that. I am just glad your daughter is going to be all right." After that, the opposition to Nora's presence in Hachita largely crumbled. Mrs. Henderson became one of her staunchest defenders, loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that Nora Armstrong was a treasure and that her husband was lucky to have her. The irony was not lost on Nora, but she accepted the change of heart with grace. Christmas that year was special. Nora decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and made special treats from recipes her mother had taught her. Several neighbors came to visit on Christmas Day, bringing gifts and well wishes. It felt like a true celebration of community and acceptance. As the new year of 1879 arrived, Nora began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Wade, not wanting to raise his hopes prematurely. But by late January, there was no doubt. She was carrying their child. She chose to tell him on a Sunday afternoon as they sat together on the porch watching the winter sun set over the land they both loved. Wade had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Wade, I have something to tell you," she said softly. He looked down at her, his blue eyes attentive. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Nora said simply, watching his face. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Wade just stared at her, processing the information. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise, bright and transformative. He swept her up in his arms, holding her close and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Nora, that is the best news I have ever received. Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" Nora laughed at his sudden flurry of concern. "I am fine, Wade. Pregnancy is natural, not an illness. But yes, there will be changes ahead. The baby should come in late summer if my calculations are correct." Wade set her down gently, then knelt and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach, as if he could hear the baby's heartbeat. "Hello there, little one," he said softly. "I am your father, and I already love you more than I thought possible. You are going to have the best mother in the world, and I promise to do everything in my power to be worthy of being your father." Nora felt tears streaming down her face as she ran her fingers through Wade's hair. This moment, this perfect moment of pure joy and anticipation, was everything she had never dared to hope for when she had stumbled into Hachita broken and alone just months ago. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and into spring. Nora continued to work around the ranch as her energy allowed, though Wade became almost comically overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing anything he deemed too strenuous. She finally had to sit him down and explain that exercise was good for both her and the baby, and that she would not spend the next several months sitting idle. "I am not fragile," she told him gently but firmly. "I am strong and I am capable, and I need to keep moving. Trust me to know my own limits." Wade reluctantly agreed, though he continued to hover, ready to jump in and help at the slightest sign that Nora might be overdoing it. She found his concern endearing, even when it was a bit excessive. In March, Martha Peters organized a gathering of the local ranch wives to prepare baby clothes and supplies for Nora. Even Mrs. Henderson attended, bringing a beautiful quilt she had made herself. The women sat together sewing and chatting, welcoming Nora fully into their circle. It was a far cry from the cold reception she had received less than a year ago, and Nora felt profoundly grateful for how much had changed. Spring brought the busiest time of year on the ranch, with calving season and branding. Nora helped where she could, though Wade insisted she stay well away from the actual cattle work. Instead, she focused on managing the household, preparing meals for the extra hands they hired for roundup, and maintaining the garden that was beginning to flourish in the warming weather. Summer arrived with its characteristic heat, and Nora grew large with child. She moved more slowly now, her belly round and prominent. But she remained in good spirits, excited about the impending arrival and making final preparations. Wade had transformed the small spare room where Nora had first stayed into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and sanding it smooth so there would be no rough edges to harm delicate baby skin. In late August, on a night when the heat was oppressive and the air seemed to shimmer with anticipation, Nora's labor began. Wade immediately rode for the doctor and for Martha Peters, who had agreed to assist with the birth. Then he returned to Nora's side and refused to leave, holding her hand through each contraction and murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Wade was terrified, when Nora's face was so pale and drawn with pain that he feared for her life. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and she worked through each contraction with grim determination. Finally, as the afternoon sun streamed through the bedroom window, their son was born. His first cry was loud and indignant, and the sound of it brought tears to Wade's eyes. The doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Nora's arms. She looked down at their son with an expression of such pure love that it took Wade's breath away. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were already trying to focus on his mother's face. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," Nora whispered, echoing the words Wade had spoken to her stomach months ago. "Welcome to the world. We have been waiting for you." Wade leaned down, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his son, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "What should we name him?" he asked softly. Nora looked up at him, her gray eyes shining. "I was thinking William, after your father, William Armstrong. What do you think?" Wade had to clear his throat past the lump of emotion. "I think that is perfect. My father would have been honored." The doctor and Martha Peters left after making sure both mother and baby were doing well. Wade was supposed to get some rest himself, but he could not tear himself away. He sat beside the bed, watching Nora nurse their son, marveling at how natural she looked, how right this all felt. "He is beautiful," Wade said softly. "You are beautiful. "Thank you, Nora. Thank you for giving me this gift, this family." "Thank you for saving me," Nora replied, reaching out to take his hand. "When I came to Hachita, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never trust anyone again, never love again, never feel safe again. But you gave me all of that and so much more. You gave me a home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you more than words can express." "I love you too," Wade said, kissing her forehead gently. "You and William both. You are my whole world." The early days with William were exhausting but joyful. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs and a healthy appetite. Nora proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when woken for the fourth time in a night. Wade helped wherever he could, walking the floor with William when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, supporting Nora through the inevitable challenges of new parenthood. The town of Hachita celebrated the birth with genuine warmth. Neighbors brought gifts and food, and even people who had been coldest to Nora initially now stopped by to offer congratulations and admire the baby. Wade watched these interactions with satisfaction, seeing how completely Nora had won over the community through sheer force of character and kindness. One afternoon, when William was about 2 months old, Mrs. Henderson stopped by with yet another gift, this time a set of tiny knitted booties. "He is growing so fast," she exclaimed, peering into the cradle where William slept. "He's going to be a big, strong boy just like his father." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson," Nora said warmly. "These are beautiful. You did not have to bring anything else." "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson said briskly. "I wanted to. You know, Nora, I have been thinking. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not just for judging you when you first arrived, but for how I treated you even after you married Wade. I was so convinced I knew what kind of person you were, but I did not know anything at all. You have shown this town what true Christian charity looks like, and I am ashamed it took me so long to see it." Nora reached out and squeezed the older woman's hand. "What matters is that you see it now. We all make judgments sometimes. What is important is being willing to change our minds when we learn we were wrong." After Mrs. Henderson left, Wade came up behind Nora and wrapped his arms around her waist, careful not to disturb William, who she was holding. "You are an extraordinary woman, Nora Armstrong," he murmured into her hair. "Do you know that?" "I am just a woman who was given a second chance," Nora replied, leaning back against him. "And I am determined to make the most of it." The seasons cycled through again, and William grew from a baby into a toddler with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. He was a happy, active child who loved following Wade around the ranch and helping Nora in the garden. The ranch prospered under their combined management, the cattle herd growing, the land yielding good harvests from Nora's ever-expanding garden. In the spring of 1881, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with joy untainted by the nervousness of first-time parents. They knew what to expect now, knew that they could handle the challenges of a newborn together. Their second son, Thomas, was born in early autumn, an easier birth than William's had been. He was a quieter baby than his brother, more content to observe the world around him with solemn dark eyes. William, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his new little brother and wanted to help with everything, from diaper changes to feeding times. Wade stood in the doorway of the nursery one evening, watching Nora nurse Thomas while William sat beside her, carefully holding his brother's tiny hand. The picture they made, his family, his whole world contained in this one small room, filled him with such profound contentment that he had to pause and just absorb it. Nora looked up and caught him watching. She smiled, that warm, full smile that never failed to make his heart skip a beat even after 3 years of marriage. "Come join us," she invited softly. Wade crossed the room and settled onto the floor beside the rocking chair, putting his arm around William. Together, the four of them sat in comfortable silence, a family complete and whole. As Thomas grew older and William became more independent, Nora found time to expand her role in the community. She started teaching reading and writing to some of the ranch children who lived too far from town to attend school regularly. Wade built a small schoolroom addition onto their house, and several afternoons a week, children would gather there to learn. The ranch continued to prosper. Wade's reputation as a fair and honest rancher grew, and he began to take on a leadership role in the local cattlemen's association. Nora became known as someone who could be counted on in a crisis, whether it was nursing the sick, helping with difficult births, or organizing relief efforts when drought or other hardships struck the area. In 1884, when William was 5 and Thomas was 3, Nora gave birth to their first daughter. They named her Sarah, after Nora's mother. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and both her brothers immediately adored her. Wade held his daughter for the first time and felt something shift in his chest. His sons had filled him with pride and purpose, but his daughter awakened a fierce protectiveness he had not expected. She was so tiny, so delicate, and he found himself making silent promises to always keep her safe, to always make sure she knew her worth. "We make good babies together," Nora said sleepily from the bed, smiling at the sight of Wade cradling Sarah. "We do," Wade agreed, carefully placing Sarah in her mother's arms. "We make a good everything together." Life settled into a new rhythm with 3 children. The house was louder, busier, filled with the sounds of children playing and learning and growing. Wade expanded the ranch house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. Every improvement was made with Nora's input, the two of them planning and building their life together in the most literal sense. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. William grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build and temperament. Thomas was quieter and more studious, preferring books to cattle work, but still doing his share without complaint. Sarah proved to be a perfect blend of both parents, tough as nails when needed but also thoughtful and kind. In 1889, Nora gave birth to their 4th and final child, another boy they named James. By this time, Wade was 41 and Nora was 33, and they both agreed that their family felt complete. 4 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, a place in their community that had been hard-won but was now secure. They had built something remarkable together. One evening, after all the children were finally asleep, Wade and Nora sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The New Mexico sky was ablaze with stars, and the night air was cool and pleasant after the heat of the day. "You ever think about that first day?" Wade asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "When you got off that wagon train and the whole town was ready to condemn you?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In a way it did," Wade said thoughtfully. "We are both different people than we were then. Better people, I think." "Definitely better," Nora agreed. She turned to look at him, her face serious. "Wade, do you know what the best part of our life together is? Tell me." "It is not just that you saved me that day, though you did. It is that you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw their own assumptions and judgments. You gave me a chance to be who I really was, not who circumstances had forced me to become. That is the gift you gave me, and it is worth more than anything." Wade pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "You gave me the same gift, Nora. You saw past the lonely cowboy who had convinced himself he did not need anyone. You showed me what it meant to have a partner, a true partner in every sense of the word. You made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Nora spoke again. "I am proud of us, Wade. Proud of what we have built, not just the ranch and the house, but the family, the life. We took something that started with judgment and hardship and turned it into this beautiful thing." "I am proud of us too," Wade said. "And I am proud of you. You came here with nothing but a battered carpetbag and more courage than anyone gave you credit for. And you became not just my wife, but the heart of this entire community. You earned that through hard work and kindness and sheer force of will. You are my pride and my joy, Nora Armstrong. You always will be." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind that came from overwhelming emotion. "And you are mine. You and our children and this life we have made together. I would not change a single thing." "Not even that first hard day?" Wade asked gently. "Especially not that," Nora said firmly, "because it brought me here to you to this. Every hardship was worth it to end up exactly where I am now." They kissed then, a kiss that held 11 years of love and partnership and shared joy. When they finally pulled apart, Wade stood and offered Nora his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Armstrong, let us go to bed. Morning comes early, and I imagine at least one of our children will be up before dawn." Nora took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "All part of the adventure," she said with a smile. They walked inside together, checking on each child as they always did before retiring. William, now 10, sprawled across his bed with a book fallen open on his chest. Thomas, 8, curled up small under his blankets, his face peaceful in sleep. Sarah, 5, clutched her beloved rag doll, her auburn hair spread across the pillow. And baby James, just a few months old, sleeping in the cradle Wade had made, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. 4 children, each one a blessing, each one proof that love could overcome hardship and build something lasting. In their own room, Wade and Nora prepared for bed with the comfortable ease of long practice. When they finally settled under the covers, Nora nestled into Wade's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I love you," she murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," Wade replied, holding her close. "Today, tomorrow, and always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. The children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. William took to ranching naturally, and by his late teens was Wade's right hand in managing the operation. Thomas, as expected, was more drawn to academic pursuits, and Wade and Nora saved carefully to send him to college back east. Sarah proved to have her mother's talent for healing, and began apprenticing with the town doctor. James, the baby, was still finding his way but showed promise in everything he touched. Wade and Nora watched their children grow with pride and sometimes wistfulness for the days when they were small and needed their parents for everything. But they also took joy in seeing the capable, kind adults their children were becoming. They had raised them to be independent, to think for themselves, to treat all people with respect regardless of circumstance. The lessons they had learned through their own hard experiences had been passed down to the next generation. The ranch continued to prosper. Wade had a reputation throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher. Nora's school had expanded, and she now taught not just ranch children but any child whose parents wanted them to have an education. Several of her former students had gone on to college or successful careers, and they often wrote to thank her for giving them the foundation they needed. In 1895, when Wade was 47 and Nora was 39, William announced his engagement to a young woman from a neighboring ranch. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was everything Wade and Nora could have hoped for their son. The wedding was a joyous affair, held at the ranch with half the county in attendance. As Wade watched his son pledge his life to his chosen partner, he caught Nora's eye across the crowd and saw his own emotions reflected there. Pride, joy, a touch of bittersweet recognition that their children were moving on to their own lives. But also contentment, deep and abiding, in knowing that they had given their children the tools they needed to build good lives. 2 years later, Thomas graduated from college with honors and returned home with plans to open a law practice in Hachita. The town had grown substantially over the years and could support a resident lawyer. Wade and Nora helped him set up his office, proud beyond measure of his accomplishments. Sarah, at 18, announced her intention to attend nursing school. It was unusual for women, but Sarah had inherited her mother's determination, and neither Wade nor Nora dreamed of standing in her way. They supported her decision fully, helping her make arrangements to study in Santa Fe. James, at 14, was still at home and showing an interest in both ranching and business. He had Wade's head for numbers and Nora's people skills, a combination that suggested he would be successful at whatever he chose to pursue. As their children launched into their own lives, Wade and Nora found themselves entering a new phase of their marriage. The house was quieter, the demands on their time less immediate. They rediscovered the simple pleasure of each other's company, taking evening rides together, sitting on the porch watching sunsets, talking for hours about everything and nothing. They were in their 50s now, graying and weathered by time and sun, but still very much in love. If anything, their love had deepened over the years, tempered by shared trials and strengthened by shared triumphs. They knew each other completely, could communicate with a glance, finished each other's sentences without thinking. One day, as they were working together in the garden, Nora straightened up and pressed her hand to her lower back with a groan. "Getting old," she said ruefully. "Remember when I could work all day without feeling it?" Wade moved behind her and began massaging her shoulders. "We have earned our aches and pains. We have worked hard and built a good life." "We have," Nora agreed, leaning back into his touch. "No regrets, not a single one," Wade said firmly. "Especially not about the day I brought home a woman the town mocked. Best decision I ever made." Nora turned in his arms and looked up at him, her gray eyes still bright despite the lines around them. "I used to be that woman. Now I am just Nora Armstrong, respected member of the community, wife, mother, grandmother." "You are also still my pride and joy," Wade said, cupping her face tenderly. "That has never changed and never will." They kissed in the garden, surrounded by the vegetables Nora had planted and tended, on the land they had built their life on together. It was not a passionate kiss of young lovers, but something deeper and more enduring. A kiss that spoke of decades of partnership, of choosing each other every day, of love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. By 1900, William and Elizabeth had given Wade and Nora 3 grandchildren. Thomas had married and settled in Hachita with his wife and their first child on the way. Sarah had completed her nursing training and returned to work alongside the town doctor, much to everyone's benefit. James, now 19, was managing an increasing portion of the ranch operations and had begun courting a young woman from a nearby town. Wade and Nora, now in their early 50s, had begun to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing William and James to take over most of the heavy work. But they remained involved and engaged, offering advice and support when needed but trusting their sons to make their own decisions. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done so many times before, Nora took Wade's hand and squeezed it gently. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something that will last beyond us. Our children are good people building good lives. The ranch is prosperous and will continue to be. We have a place in this community that is secure and respected. We did all of that together, starting from the worst possible beginning." Wade brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We did. And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, God willing. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what our children accomplish, to continue building this life we love." "I look forward to every one of those years," Nora said. "As long as I have you beside me, I am exactly where I want to be." "You will always have me," Wade promised. "Until my last breath, Nora. You are my partner, my love, my everything. That will never change." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The lonely cowboy and the mocked woman were gone, transformed through love and determination into partners who had proven that sometimes the best families are built not on spotless pasts, but on chosen futures. Inside the house, they could hear James moving about, making preparations for the next day's work. In town, their other children were tucking their own children into bed, carrying on the traditions and values Wade and Nora had instilled. Across the territory, people who had known them over the years thought of them as an example of what could be accomplished through hard work, integrity, and unwavering commitment to each other. The story that had begun with judgment and hardship had become a story of triumph and love. Nora, once rejected by the town, had become one of its most valued citizens. Wade, once lonely and isolated, now had a large, thriving family and deep roots in his community. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy. As they finally went inside for the night, Wade took one last look at the land spread out before them, silvered by moonlight. This land had given them everything, had tested them and rewarded them in equal measure, and they had proven worthy of it. In their bedroom, as they prepared for sleep, Nora caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was 51 years old now, her auburn hair shot through with silver, her face lined by years of sun and laughter. She looked nothing like the desperate, bruised young woman who had stumbled into Hachita all those years ago. Wade came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we have come," Nora said, "and how grateful I am for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they brought us here." "I am grateful too," Wade said, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Every single day, I am grateful that I was in town that day, grateful that I had the courage to offer you work, grateful that you said yes. Everything good in my life flows from that moment." Nora turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "I love you, Wade Armstrong. I have loved you from the moment you offered me dignity when everyone else offered only judgment. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you, Nora Armstrong," Wade replied. "My pride and joy, yesterday, today, and always." They climbed into bed together, comfortable in the rituals of decades. Wade pulled Nora close, and she settled against him with a contented sigh. Outside, the New Mexico night was peaceful and still. Inside, two souls who had found each other against all odds rested in the perfect certainty of their love. Their story had no dramatic ending, because the best stories never really end. They continue in the lives of children and grandchildren, in the examples set and the values taught, in the love that ripples out through generations. Wade and Nora would live many more years together, watching their family grow and flourish, continuing to be pillars of their community, never taking for granted the precious gift they had found in each other. And when people in Hachita told stories of the town's history, They always included the tale of the lonely cowboy who had taken in a woman the town mocked, and how she had become his pride and joy. But more than that, the story became about how two people, broken by life's hardships, had mended each other and built something beautiful together. It became a story about the power of compassion over judgment, of courage over convention, of love over everything else. It was a story that deserved to be told, a story that reminded people that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with perfect circumstances, but with the simple choice to see another person's worth when everyone else has turned away. Wade and Nora Armstrong had made that choice, and it had changed everything. Their legacy would be not just in the thriving ranch or the successful children or the respected place in the community, but in the lesson they had taught through simply living their lives with integrity and love. That lesson would echo through the generations, a reminder that the measure of a life well lived is not in its perfect beginning, but in what is built from whatever beginning is given. And as they drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms after decades together, both Wade and Nora felt the deep peace of knowing they had lived and loved well. Their story, which had begun in such darkness, had become a beacon of light for everyone who knew them. The lonely cowboy had found his home in Nora's heart. The mocked woman had found her worth reflected in Wade's eyes. Together, they had proven that love, real love, could overcome any obstacle and transform any circumstance. It was a happily ever after earned through hard work, unwavering commitment, and the simple, profound act of choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. And that was exactly as it should be.